So Lakshmi, we can start.
Sure, ma'am. We have joined by Dr. Sundar, Dr. Tamani, Dr. Sami, Dr. P.N. Prasad sir, and as you mentioned, Dr. Rao would be joining with me. So I guess we are good to start now. And audience will also keep joining in. With your permission, let me start the program.
Yes, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Lakshmi Prasanna, Coordinator for All India Drugs Control Officers Confederation Training Academy. It's a great pleasure and privilege to welcome all the distinguished speakers, guests, and the office bearers of ADCOC, regulators from the state and center, and industry members. Pleased to welcome you all for today's interesting session on the accelerating regulatory pathway for biologics and biosimilar drugs. We are honored and pleased to have with us Dr. P.B.N. Prasad, Joint Drugs Controller CDSCO, as a special guest for today's program. Thanks for inviting our invitation, sir, and pleased to have you with us. Ladies and gentlemen, the biologics and biosimilars have gone to become an indispensable tool in the modern medicine. And they are helping the patients in managing the chronic diseases. And there is a great need for all our drug regulator community to understand the concepts of biosimilars and practices across the globe. So we are so pleased to have the great industry leaders of biologics space and the regulatory experts from the industry and the government officials panel along with us today. I take this pleasure to invite Dr. Gurjit Chowdhury, Founder and Managing Director, Bio Innovative Services Private Limited, and she is also the Senior Advisor, Biocon Limited and Syngene International. And she is the Senior Advisor for Thermo Fisher Scientific India, and she is also leading the Association of Biotechnology-Led Enterprises as a Senior Advisor. Pleasure to have you with us now. And we have a great set of panelists with us today, Dr. Sundar Raman, Vice President and Head of the Global Regulatory Affairs Biocon. Dr. Tamal Raha, Managing Director, Integrated Biopharma and Pharma Solution. Dr. Samir Sangeet Rao, Vice President, Regulatory Strategy and Project Management at Bharat Serum and Vaccines Private Limited. We are also being joined by Dr. S.R. Rao, Advisory Secretary of Review Committee on Genetic Manipulation, Department of Biotechnology. And Dr. Rao is going to join us soon. And thank you everyone for joining us and for gracing your valuable presence with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, most of you might be aware that All India Drugs Control Officers Confederation, ADCOC, is a national body representing the regulators across the state through the state associations and also the regulators from the CDSCO. And it's established in 1995. And we have a 26-year-old long journey, empowering all the regulators across the state on the latest developments. And it's a long vision of the ADCOC to have its own training academy. And we were able to cherish our dream in the last year. And our ADCOC Academy is established in the Hyderabad in the last month, October 2020. And from the last 1 year or so, we have been organizing series of webinars on monthly basis on various regulatory and related topics, which are very much useful for the industry and for the regulators. With that note, I welcome you all for today's panel discussion, and let me help you to welcome Dr. P.B.N. Prasad, Joint Drugs Controller, for his opening remarks.
Good morning, Devaskar Garu, Rajavanu Garu, the executive body of the ADCOC, Lakshmi Prasanna, esteemed panels of today's topic, Dr. Gurjit Chowdhury, Dr. Sundar, Dr. Samir Singh, Dr. Rao, and ADCOC members and all the respective drug controllers, drug control officers of the state and the central. It's indeed my privilege to share my knowledge and experiences with respect to the accelerated pathway, regulatory pathway in terms of biologicals and biosimilars. As you all know, biologicals and biosimilars primarily includes the vaccines and the biosimilars like insulin or monoclonal antibodies, stem cell, etc. Now you have chosen a current topic, the accelerated regulatory pathway. This is a very selective topic, which is very meeting the requirements of the current trends of the 2020 and 2021 due to pandemic, and how the regulatory bodies globally or even the Indian CDSCO, how we have moved in a rapid pace because the pandemic made us to move in that way. So accelerated regulatory pathway, people think, or many people who do not have the idea think that there was a dilution of standards or a compromise of standards. Not at all. A predictability rating is taken into consideration based on the data. Surrogate endpoints are taken into consideration during the clinical trial or the preclinical data. And the clinical endpoints where at least the interim data analysis on the clinical trials data is being obtained at the level of at least phase 2 for the speedy approval for the emergency use authorization. We have all heard, I never heard in my career, emergency use authorization. And perhaps most of the regulators do the same. This is the situation as exceptional cases, and that is how even in the new drugs and clinical trial rules. In the second schedule, if you can see, the accelerated approval process and expedited review process, these are the two important things based on which the DCJ office has moved in approval processes of the vaccines during this pandemic for emergency use authorization. Apart from vaccines, MAPs like itolizumab, tocilizumab, and even the other drugs like remdesivir, etc., or favipiravir, etc., have been taken into consideration for approval process. Now, today's topic is very interesting because biologics and biological similars, biosimilars, it's a very challenging issues are there. Even otherwise, if it is not even an accelerated pathway, even then it's quite a challenging subject. Because if you can see, there are intrinsic difficulties in the bioprocesses, bioanalytical methods, validation, and many other impurities, unlike the conventional chemical impurities, the unexpected host cell proteins, and there are other issues are there where there are difficult processes and difficult analytical methods are quite challenging. And in these challenging methods, apart from this, we rely more on when an applicant makes an application to the regulator, first we see the preclinical data, at least the preclinical data, and then move ahead. The next phase is the CMC, the chemistry, manufacturing, and control for the drug substance and the drug product. Parallelly, you conduct the stability studies, process validations, and analytical method validations simultaneously. A good data of a developmental batch, a good data from a preclinical endpoints will help to at least to lead as a predictability based on the surrogate endpoints, because you don't have a standard drug for the treatment, for example, in case of COVID-19. You don't have a standard comparator. So therefore, you need to rely basically on the surrogate endpoints, which has adequate predictability in arriving a point with the safety consideration to arrive for emergency use authorization. So structurally, if you can see the accelerated approval processes, is where to waive off, where to accept it, and where to consider the external data into consideration. For example, the ICH countries, if it is already done, we can waive off, because ultimately what is acceleration is the timelines. So we are meeting the timelines, reducing the timelines, expediting the processes of the application, at the same time ensuring the public health safety is very important. Now, if you can see structurally the approval processes, accelerated approval process and expedited review process. Now, of course, in US and all, US FDA say rolling review, or UK MHRA and Canadian FDA says, but we have not gone to that extent of rolling review. In fact, practically we are doing the rolling review, but still we have not come into in the rules or anything like that, a rolling review process. But an expeditious review is inclusive, and the conventional 90 days time of clinical trial processes, applications disposal has been reduced to less than 30 days during this pandemic. Because apart from this CDSCO, the vaccine approvals and the COVID-related treatments are even being monitored by NEGVAC, the National Expert Group, Empanel Group on Vaccines. So therefore, the regulator is under pressure, the researcher or this thing is under pressure, and huge investment is in these processes, especially from the government side, to come with the R&D, to come with the developmental issues, and all these things are there. So therefore, approval processes, or even there is no dilution of standards, as many think that the accelerated approval process, but standard benchmarks are being followed, safety aspects are ensured, immunogenicity is being taken into consideration, surrogate endpoints are taken into consideration for better predictability, and emergency use authorization is done only in such cases when the applicant finishes off at least an acceptable safety and efficacy data, or immunogenicity data, or neutralizing antibodies, etc. in case of vaccines. In such cases only the emergency use authorization application is made. So the manufacturer or the applicant initially makes the developmental batches, the preclinical batches, the CMC, at least a phase 2 clinical data, or a bridging study data, for example, in case of Covishield of AstraZeneca. So these things are being taken into consideration, and simultaneously the review of the dossiers are taking place. And therefore, based and apart from the CDSCO, the regulators, apart from the review process, the subject expert panel is there exclusively for this pandemic, for example, COVID or any other approval processes. The accelerated approval process apart from the pandemic or COVID, like orphan drugs or any unmet medical need, is also taken into consideration. For such drugs, there is an accelerated approval process there. In addition to that, basically the primary point is the unmet medical need is important criteria why we go for such drugs where there is no treatment at all. There is no prophylactic or a therapeutic treatment at all. Because if you can see all the vaccines which is available in the present immunization schedule or in the immunization program or for a therapeutic purpose, long-term safety and efficacy study data is there. Today, we encountered in such an issue where we don't have a long-term and safety data. We have a predictability markers. We have certain standard rigorous evaluation of the parameters, benchmarks, based on which the regulator approves under emergency use authorization. And the shelf life of the product is also being taken into consideration with a very short shelf life span of 4 months, 6 months, and it is extended parallelly. It is being rollingly reviewed. This is called as rolling review. So as the feedback comes, the data is being taken into consideration. So none of the products which are there in emergency use authorization in India at this moment are not gone into the marketing approval, where recently the US FDA has gone for marketing approval of Pfizer. So unless the data is very sufficient, you just can't ensure it. So therefore, these are very primary indicators for the emergency use authorization. And in fact, a fact sheet is also taken into consideration in the emergency use authorization, like favipiravir, remdesivir, etc. Of course, not in a mass immunization. The fact sheet is also given to the patient and given it back to the feedback. So this is how the entire review process is taken into consideration. So I gave a briefing on how the regulatory look into the consideration. But anyhow, today's topic, there are experts from the panels are there, from the industry, from the RCGM, etc. And what are their considerations, what are their criteria, and how the challenges you come across, especially either in bioprocesses or in the development stage or in the manufacturing stage or analytical method development, or how the safety aspects are taken into consideration. So and there are no standard markers. So these are all very challenging issues. Unlike the pharmaceuticals, the development itself is right from development. It's a very difficult task. And once you overcome these challenges, there will be waivers, there will be predictabilities, there will be surrogate endpoints, immunogenicity points, and safety aspects and efficacy points are taken into consideration, at least meeting the benchmark requirements. And continuous review is always there from the regulator side, and continuous feedback from the manufacturer side or the applicant side is also there. So that is how the review process is there. Until it's fully established, it goes into the marketing approval. So these few lines, I feel that how the approval process are taking place in the CDSCO at the office of DCGI level, where there is a biological division looking into recombinant products on one side, vaccines on the other side, SCC on the other side. At least monthly or weekly, once there is a COVID SEC related meetings are there. There is expedited review process. If you can see in this COVID, hundreds of applications have been cleared during this COVID or processed, disposed of because of this accelerated pathways. And this is how the prevalent globally as well as in Indian scenario, this is how we are working. And I feel that today's expert panel members and Dr. Buljit will be able to throw light on how the accelerated processes, how the industry perspective, and how their research perspective, both biosimilars and vaccines, how they will throw light, and how we will learn much about from them. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for putting forward the clear vision of the CDSCO and the review process happening, especially in the times of the pandemic. With that, we'll start the panel discussion, and I invite Dr. Buljit Chowdhury, founder and MD, Bioinnovative Services Private Limited, to take forward the discussion on the regulatory pathway for the biosimilar drugs. Over to you.
First of all, a very good morning to all, and we are very delighted to be with the young regulators as well, who in the academy, and absolutely most grateful to AID-SCOC to invite us as industry panel. What Dr. Prasad has said is really the fundamental of the entire process that we have been seeing as, industry. And as a nation and as an industry, I want to personally thank the DCGI and the entire team, the Joint Drug Controller, Dr. Prasad. I can vouch, since Lockout 1, there was not a single day, perhaps some Sundays, not even Saturdays, that office has not been open day and almost till 11 o'clock at night and accessible to all. The other sterling asset test, and for which each one of you should be extremely proud, is that regulators of the US, regulators of EU have been into a lot of critical slight, of course, of China, and even during Olympics for Japan. All these regulated countries have had controversies arising on regulations, but our regulators have really contributed to our population, to us, to keep us protected, and finding pathways, notices, etc., which have ensured quality and, more important, access and affordability. So with this, I'd just like our panelists to spend more time. Each of these panelists have been selected on the basis of the fact that several of them are authors here. Our current DCGI really penned down from the CDSCO, and Dr. S.R. Rao penned down the last revision in 2016 of the 2012 Biosimilar Guidelines. With the pandemic, there has been such a highlight all over the world on biologics, both novel and obviously the biosimilars, which really provided the access, as well as, I mean, the question of on vaccines, we need a separate panel later, perhaps, and you may have already been through so many, but even in biosimilars are the ones which actually covered much larger populations, especially in ARDS, cytokine storm, etc. So I'd request Dr. S.R. Rao to tell us from an RCGM perspective, that is the preclinical part, which goes for all biologics to in parallel with the CDSCO application. Where we are actually moving to is both Secretary Dr. Renu Sarup as well as Dr. Somani have encouraged us to look and revisit as an industry to come together. I do want to share with you, never before had industry seen the collaborative process that we had in 2015-16, where Dr. G.N. Singh actually hosted 14 meetings inside the CDSCO, open to all global companies to present as industry associations, and also, you know, some of us were conveners over here. So Dr. Tamal Raha, Dr. Sundar, all have contributed earlier, and we are available for any question and answers after this as well. So may I request Dr. Rao to present, and then we will move to some of the other issues in the latter part, what we think as industry needs to go into the next phase of proposing some changes in the more evolution in the biosimilar guidelines. Over to you, Dr. Rao.
Since Dr. Rao hasn't joined, I mean, he has joined and has left.
He joined, and now I think maybe he's. So some of the main topics we want to discuss today are very briefly. One is, of course, last time we touched upon product-specific guidelines, but we were unable to do so. And then there was also, over the years, in fact, after we did the guidelines, we found that, Mexico and several other countries, including Mexico and Brazil, copied them, etc. But now there are some other, this EUA has actually brought in a lot of opportunity. We need to look at, we feel that in terms of timelines, to shorten the timelines, RCGM is now meeting twice a month, which is much better than earlier. So from an agenda perspective, we really feel we could look at the EMA, US FDA, where they have product-specific guidelines for some of them. And also where there is an interchangeability clause, this is questionable, of course, how applicable it is. US FDA since then has approved so many biosimilars, and in fact, in insulin. So I will request Sundar to take this up, and we have separate guidelines for innovator MABs and non-MABs. Another provision that you've already brought in the NCLT guidelines is in the new drug and clinical trial guidelines is the pre-IND. So if you could give specific guidance, both from an RCGM perspective, as well as from the perspective of CDSCO, where you have instituted a system on the entire product strategy and development strategy as FDA does. And then last of all, I was very happy to see that Dr. Prasad already talked about the recognition of Canada and other mutual, this is not a part of biosimilars, but we saw that when in the last guidelines, when we did talk about that phase 3 waiver, and then we talked about having a phase 4, structured phase 4 is now a practice across all new drug development, if the phase 3 is not there. And it has already, we have in our new clinical, new drugs and clinical guidelines of March 2019, it was gazetted that the regulator could, at the discretion of examining data, if it is already approved in regulated countries, though that was not defined as ICH or otherwise, but we would be able to have the new drug available to our population. Unfortunately, that has not happened in totality because the countries were not defined as we understand. And we have counted almost 37 drugs are there in this MABS area. as well as in vaccines, non-COVID vaccines, which do come under this, where they are approved in 30 or 40 countries at times, but the SEC is not clear whether we should be introducing them with a phase 3 waiver. And largely the phase 3 was not done during the blackout period of clinical trials between 2012 to 14-15. And there are many which fall into that. We would request that to be looked at, and we should address this where there is a great deal of knowledge already available, especially in biosimilars. The need for a phase 3 waiver, as Dr. Prasad is, if it's justified, should be considered in the common drugs like pegfilgrastim, as well as in insulin, etc. So with this, I would like to hand over to actually Dr. Rao if he's here. If he's not here, then Sundar could start his, Sundar could take us through. So Sundar, would you like to now start, please?
Yeah, can you hear me, Kuljit?
Yes, very well.
Okay, thank you. Namaste, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Kuljit, and the organizations involved. Thank you very much. This is a wonderful opportunity, and it's a privilege to be with you, speaking on topics that's pretty close to my heart. But before I get into the topic, I want to make a couple of points and then tell you a story. So 21st century is going to be the century of India, right? It is going to be our century to dominate the world. Honorable Prime Minister chaired for the first time United Nations Security Council in our nation's history. 70% of generic comes from India, right? And this is absolutely known to everyone here. What's more important? I'll tell you a story. Last month, I was in the US visiting my in-laws, and my father-in-law takes statin, and I was telling him the chances are there's a 35 to 40% chance that the drug that you're taking comes from Biocon. And he didn't know this, so he went inside, got the yellow box, and sure enough, it was from Biocon. Right. So the drugs that we make here has meaningful impact on people that are close to us, and we are having a global impact. That is going to only accelerate and enhance with the biologics, as majority of the drugs transition from small molecule chemical drugs in terms of value to biologics and subsequently biosimilars. So in that context, I have 3 topics that I'm planning to discuss. Number 1, on interchangeability, specifically how we went about it. Number 2, on the concept of how to accelerate and benefit Indian companies globally in the context of in the current scenario where Indian companies are making foray into being the first in approval globally. And number 3, briefly on the novel molecule approval. So interchangeability. So as you know, the Indian company, of course, proudly Biocon, is the first company globally anywhere in the world to get interchangeability rating for a biologic product by the US FDA. And of course, that didn't come straightforward. There were barriers. And we not only had to work with the FDA and the policymakers in the US to advanced science-based, patient-focused policy points, which we placed forth, which enabled the issuance of the guidance there in the interchangeability guidance, where they looked at all of the points that we proposed in an objective, logical manner. And they agreed with us that for insulins, where the importance of immunogenicity is fairly low, both from a patient perspective and from a product perspective. Now, what do I mean by patient perspective and product perspective? From a patient perspective, even if a patient develops an anti-drug antibody, it is proven in literature that it does not have a neutralizing effect. All the epitopes of immunogenicity is well known and well characterized. So given it's a simple molecule, no glycosylation, no post-translational modification, The epitopes of immunogenicity involved are well mapped and well characterized, and those are linear peptides. And therefore, even if a patient develops anti-drug antibody, it does not impact or neutralize the drug, and thereby affecting the treatment for the patient. This is huge in shifting the thinking of the FDA in taking into consideration a complete perspective on both patient-related factors and product-related factors. Now let's come to product-related factors. Again, here, because this molecule can be characterized to the last Dalton, we are able to take the primary, secondary, and higher order structure and characterize really well. And if there are any differences, study them in vitro. Incidence makes it amenable, where we can study the safety also in vitro. And these points were taken into consideration. So that is why for insulins, the FDA issued the guidance that said analytical similarity coupled with PK/PD, which is as close to the generic as possible, is good enough not only for biosimilarity, but for the interchangeability as well. So this is groundbreaking and ground shifting for the future biologic molecules also. But so this, if in India we can adopt these concepts, thereby enabling a faster approval of insulin products, that will be fantastic. That's point number one. Point number two is about the recognition of global approval by India. And say 10, 15 years back, maybe we were not there in terms of the first approvals. Now, if you look at biologics, Indian companies are the first, not just in India, but are the first to get approval by FDA and EMA on many of the biosimilars. First to be approved by Japan in 2014 for glargine, first to be approved for trastuzumab, first to be approved for PEG-CSF, both in Europe as well as in US. So, and in most cases, the product that was developed for Indian market, that was present in the Indian market, is the same product that is being taken to the US. A lot of companies from the so-called emerging world, I don't like that word, but the so-called emerging world, they tend to have product one for the local market or the subcontinents in Africa, Asia, and then one for the Western. But our products coming from India is the same product that goes to the Indian patients and subsequently to the European and American patients as well. So given that is the mindset with which we are developing the products, given the economic status of the country as of today, I'm not talking about 5 years from now. We are going to be a 5 trillion economy, and we're going to beat it, and we're going to be a 10 trillion economy, and the world will come to us. But for now, to enable the Indian companies, if we can start acknowledging the approvals in US and EU, thereby enabling us to do a global clinical trial, get approval, and then we will be able to get a certificate of country origin certificate and start registering much faster in the emerging markets as well. This will waive the burden of doing a specific phase 3 specific to India. And we will also be able to penetrate and enhance and build on the Atmanirbhar so that we can start benefiting patients globally as well. So my request will be to, if a product is approved by, say, Europe or FDA, request the agency to consider at least waiving the phase 3 and then accepting the approval for Indian patients, and then we can move forward. And lastly, we need to start thinking about the innovative drugs, right? So Indian patients, and I applaud the regulators in India for being pragmatic, science-based, when they took into consideration the overall safety information available for itolizumab. which was approved for psoriasis, which was approved for rheumatoid arthritis. There's published phase 3 clinical trials in more than 300 plus patients. And when we found that this drug could be repurposed for Indian patients to treat ARDS, the Indian regulators acted swiftly and provided a treatment option for the Indian patients. This was meaningful. I mean, personally, I got impacted in my family, and we were like looking for itolizumab to see if we can control the cytokine storm. So, and I was extremely personally grateful that we had the treatment option available in India and for Indian patients. So, such kind of thought process, innovative, patient-focused, and bringing novel molecules to patients also is something that the regulations should start to consider. With that, I would like to thank for the opportunity, and Kuljit, back to you.
Thank you very much, Sundar, for, would you like to comment also a little bit on the novel biologics and product-specific guidelines before we let you go?
Sure.
And if there's any question for him, please put it in the chat. We will ask him as well. Yeah. There are quite a few comment, this thing for Dr. Prasad, and we'll come back to that. Please go ahead, Sundar. On novel biologics, what we need to put in our guidelines as well. And where you talked about the reciprocity, and Dr. Prasad also brought it up, in terms of the countries, either the countries being defined, because now there are a large number of countries in ICH, and we are still an observer status as well as in PICS. So those are questions we would like to ask Dr. Prasad, but with you, if what you talked about in the Middle East, for example, we are not recognized simply because we are not part of that club. And that used to be there 20 years ago as well. I've done work there. And if you vouched personally for itolizumab, I'm not promoting, but I have seen it myself because we managed the sites at Lok Nayak Hospital and at AIIMS, and thereafter the compassionate use. And we saw that many patients for not only itolizumab and FabiFlu and others, we saw in mild to moderate, really, and tocilizumab to some extent also, but these we actually have videos because these research institutions did keep the audio and video of those patients as well, most of them. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. See, I'll take an example of that. Thanks, Kuljit. So for example, let's say we develop a disease in the rare disease area, orphan, right? Oftentimes the regulators are willing to be flexible. I'm talking about the FDA and EMA, flexible with the regular requirements. Why? Because in fact, in the US, there is a law that came into practice about half a decade ago, called the 21st Century Cures Act. And specifically in that, patient-reported outcomes, if there's a controlled, validated tool developed for a rare disease, that can become part of the label. And this is as qualitative the data can be, but such data is also valuable. So pragmatism, when it comes to applying, we are not seeking removal of requirements, right? We are only looking at what is pragmatic for the need. Is the risk-benefit ratio for the patient? It's always in the favor of the patient, and if it is so, even if the information at that point in time is maybe less favorable for efficacy, demonstrated efficacy in a large effect size clinical trial, but if it's going to impact patients with the requirement to do a phase 4 trial, I mean, it was not a carte blanche approval; it was an emergency use approval. So it's structured, risk proportional, and then with the requirement to do a phase 4 trial, and so it was very well thought out. So on the novel side, as we gain economic strength, as well as there is no shortage of creativity in our land, as we drain the economy, there are going to be bound to be more companies coming out of India. And coupled with the fact that we are the epicenter in software, there's a number of innovation that's happening that collapses the timeline involved in a drug development, including clinical trials using digital health. So we will need something in terms of regulations for digital health. We will need to bring the modern tools to bear in terms of sample size requirements. Thereby, we get a little bit more structured in terms of approving the novel drugs. As per the product-specific guidelines for biosimilars, definitely I'm a big fan of product-specific guidelines. There's talk in the policy circles in the US also that the FDA is also considering product-specific guidance post the insulins. So that insulins was the first. I'm expecting to come for MABs as well. But the Europeans led the way in issuing product-specific guidelines, and I think if India can do so also, that'll be fantastic. And lastly, I think on the recognition, the countries could be, if the regulators want to be a bit more conservative, we can start with perhaps the 4 initial ICH countries, which is Health Canada, EMA, FDA, and PMDA. This is the country list that we want to start with. Then that should be sufficient and good enough. Because I do consider other nations on par with India, China, and South Korea, for example, even though South Korea has a large biotech center. But my recommendation or request actually will be, we could start with the initial 6 countries like US FDA, EMA, Health Canada, and Japan, PMDA.
And UK now, which is a separate country.
Oh yeah, UK. Yes. I forgot the Brexit. That is
In fact, what we are trying to do is promote the UK-India alliance. The way this is a unique opportunity, and with post-Brexit, where India, Boris Johnson has with a rapport with our Prime Minister, and it on a reciprocity basis. And India is a very large generic supplier. Many for UK. In fact, that market is more than 70% comes from India. So that is we think as industry that we should promote it. It benefits both sides, and UK has also been talking about it. They've already done it with Australia.
Yeah, they should do it.
So a regulatory alliance platform is what we are sort of speaking about, because it benefits our exports. And Uday Bhaskarji here is a regulator with such a distinguished career, and after that, Pharmexcel, leading Pharmexcel, and during this COVID time, it's amazing what all policies they have done. So may I ask Dr. Prasad to throw some light on this? You mentioned about rolling review, how, and on this in terms of how you see it going forward. The US FDA has withdrawn the EUA now. And you also gave us both in India for testing, etc. While we still continue to have patients in COVID, and how would you be, doing that? There is also a question around. Sorry, Sundar, I spoke to Doctor, but before we let you go, there's a question from Parag. What are the clinical studies required for interchangeability? He's asked that question. Maybe you can just quickly.
So for insulin, today you don't need a separate clinical study, but for a MAB today, we need to do a multiple switch study. So where you have 2 arms, and one is the reference product arm, and the second one is the biosimilar arm, where we switch the patients from the reference product to biosimilar and back, and vice versa. So to make sure that the risk of switching between the reference product and the biosimilar does not impact the efficacy, safety, and immunogenicity of the product, thereby having an impact on patient therapeutic effect. So that's the requirement for MABs today. And for insulins, there's no additional study that's required. That's what the guidance did. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So, Dr. Prasad, we've had a lot of, industry representations on introducing some of the non-COVID drugs, which are already approved overseas in India at the discretion where the countries are not defined. Can it be done under a rolling process review? Can we make a representation from industry on that, and even for the non-COVID vaccines? For example, we have some of the unmet needs that you talked about. There are examples of shingles, which is used for chickenpox vaccine. And there are several others which are upcoming, dengue and so on, which are globally being developed or developed only for India. So that's one question that I would have. What is your view, and how, your current view and thinking, and how could it be shaped?
Well, at this moment, it is difficult to say, but definitely this pandemic has taught us how we will be able to cope up with this accelerated processes and all. Rolling review is not exactly a rolling review, an expeditious review. We can say that. It's not exactly in terms of what the US FDA does it, but definitely on that line. But I can't say at this juncture, but definitely this has taught us how we have to do and how we have to move with the current scenario. But I just can't say exactly other than this COVID or other than this in a very conventional way, how accelerated pathways are there. The accelerated pathways are only taken into consideration only in such cases where there is an unmet need, or in such cases, or where there's a rare diseases where you don't have a drug, and then such cases probably. So it's ultimately the risk-benefit ratio is taken into consideration at the time of approval. And other than COVID or other than the emergency drugs, it will go in a very conventional way. But definitely, the timelines have already been taken into consideration, and still further this thing would be considered. But it all depends on it's not just at the regulator level, the acceptance level, the approval processes in totality. This is an emergency use authorization, accelerated process are considered. In case of market approval processes, accelerated is not the criteria at this juncture. I mean, unless it is really we come out with a concrete way of specific inputs or specific guidelines in future. But at this moment, we discriminate. We have an idea of how the emergency use authorization and the market approval processes is completely different. When we move from emergency use authorization to market approval processes, then probably things could go in a different way. And at this juncture, it's very premature to say, but it's how the things will move and how the industry moves, or how the regulators together we collaborate and how we can evolve. Of course, we'll definitely we say that ICH observer and all, we don't know when we become a member, that's a different scenario. But definitely if we take a leaf out of the ICH things and then we move forward, definitely.
Thank you very much. You have always been our mentor, and you will, I think, all the young drug, aspirants, so to be the, and as regulators, and the 21st century, as Sundar was talking about, also belongs to the regulators. Never before would you have ever come across this challenge or dreamt that you would have this challenge. So may I now request Samir to please, present as a panelist.
Sure. Thank you, Guljit. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, very well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and very good words from Dr. Prasad and Dr. Raman. I will go through how India developed in the biologics regulatory space. So I will take you through that. Regulatory industry work is governed by rules and regulations. So all people here are from pharma industry, so I need not stress on this. And pharma and biologics industry must comply to acts, rules, schedules, and guidelines, so that we all know. And the mission of CDSO is to safeguard and enhance public health by ensuring safety, efficacy, and quality of drugs, cosmetics, and medical device. I will take some things little fast because these things are known. These are the regulatory bodies involved in biologics. The presentation is there with Edcock, so anybody who would like to go in detail can get that. So we have DCGI, we have NIB Noida, CDL Kasoli, who is taking care of vaccines, PC Gazibad, who is involved in monograph for biosimilars and biologics. Then we have GEC, where there's a live modified organism, RCGM, who takes care of the initial development, clone development, and the preclinical approval. And we have also state FDA, which grants manufacturing license, WHO GMP certificate, and audits the plant along with DCGI, NIB, or CDTL. This is what we started well before the independence. We had the Drug and Cosmetic Act 1940. The rules were modified a little bit in 1945. Then the recombinant DNA safety guideline came into picture for biologics in 1990 for the safety angle, basically. And then in 1999, we had the guideline for generating preclinical and clinical data. So imagine in 2004, the Europe guidelines were published, and India was on the forefront actually in the biosimilar to develop guidelines for how to generate preclinical and clinical data. So that was by Ministry of External Environment and Forest. Then we have some revisions of the GMP. So this was one of the turning point. Mashalkar Committee in 2003-04. There were a lot of meetings, and they developed the first, you can say, the stepwise protocols for the biologics molecule. Earlier it was called recombinant generics. Then it was called biogenerics. Then in this report, it was called recombinant pharma. And they have given 5 protocols, 2 for individually developed molecule. So wherever there is a no live modified organism, only protein, that protocol is there, where they don't require GAC involvement, only RCGM and DCGI and state FDA. And similarly for import for finished product and bulk product, as well as finished product where there is a LMO or there is no LMO. So based on that, what are the agencies required and what regulatory rules they should follow, that's what very well explained in this. Also, first time there was documents provided, typical forms by which the company should apply was clearly mentioned, apart from the DNC Act, where the clinical trial and marketing authorization was clearly mentioned. With respect to the, in 2008, a new guideline was established, guidance for industry for biologics, basically. And this is covered submission of clinical trial in a CTD format. A CTD format was introduced apart from Form 44. Also, how the submission should be done for new drug approval in the CTD form. For the first time, post-approval change guideline was established for all the changes like quality, then site, method, process, all those changes, addition of indication, addition of strength, all those are covered in that. And a very well-written guideline giving the conditions, giving the scenarios, as well as the documents required, supporting documents required. So similar guidelines are available in US, Europe, Canada, but this is a very descriptive guideline. Preparation of quality. So whatever the CTD sections, what are the quality sections are required. This guideline also provided information about what is the data required and how DCGI or CDSO would like to see the data in a very tabular manner, etc., which is quite nice. In 2011, RCGM as well as the Department of Biotechnology, they came with a guideline for the IBSC where they established the biosafety requirements, clear guidance on institutional biosafety committee and the functioning of that committee, etc. And in this, after 2005, the forms were modified to some extent to have clarity on what is required, what is not required, and a clarity basically to the individual applicant. In 2011, the pre-screening of application was initiated at CDSO Delhi. Also, DCGI created the New Drug Advisory Committee, which started functioning, and review of the clinical trial applications was initiated in 2011. As you all know, there's the blackout period 2013, where there were a lot of clinical trials were kept on hold because of some deaths due to vaccine. Then Supreme Court as well as Parliament Committee, they reviewed the whole review process and they proposed several changes. And one of the key change was there were a lot of clinical trial related changes, but the review mechanism was regulatory review mechanism was a 3-tier system was brought in, where there's a subject expert committee, an IND for novel products, and the role was to look into the clinical trial and marketing authorization application and then recommend to DCGI. There was a technical committee, which was the role was to review and endorse the decision by SEC and hear appeal of the firms. And Apex committee was to look into the review of any decisions taken by SEC and technical committee. So this was also one of the important thing, because there were a lot of changes in how the clinical trial consent was taken. There was audiovisual, etc. So a lot of good things happened after the Supreme Court order. With respect to biosimilars, in 1999, there was a guideline on what is required in preclinical and clinical. Then there were a lot of discussions. There were a lot of RCGM consultations, and then RCGM and Department of Biotechnology and CDSO came up with a task force, which really worked very hard to have developed this guideline on similar biologics, which is in turn called biosimilars over the world. And the regulatory requirements for the clinical trial as well as the marketing authorization was clearly laid down in this, and this was published in 2012. After 2012, the guideline was modified a little bit in 2016, and the key differences were that abbreviated analytical comparability was no more accepted. Phase 3 requirement was clearly laid down that minimum 100 test arm patients should be done. And mandatory phase 4 was given, so with 200 patients, single arm, and some of the critical quality attributes and key attributes are requirements were specified. So with this, so India was the first country to clearly establish the number of subjects required, and the 300 subject was considered right for the safety evaluation of the drug, biosimilar drug. And India was here also quite in 2015, 12 actually the USFDA guidelines were act was passed, and then 14-15 where the guideline of US were established, and we were quite ahead of the world. In 2017, a Sugam portal was established for online submission of applications, clinical trial, marketing authorization, etc. This was for fast and easy and convenient way of application, instant access to submitted applications, to see your status, whether it is in review stage, whether the approval is under issuance, etc. All those kind of good things you can see without calling the regulators, which are very busy with their work, and even the permissions were granted online. After that, the new guideline with respect to the clinical trial. So after the Supreme Court order, there was still some space for improvement, and this new drugs and city rules came in 2019, which basically brought quite good key new items like pre-approval and post-approval access of drug to the patients, pre-submission and post-submission meetings. So we were using this earlier prior to 2019 in a very informal way, but now this is a very formal kind of a meeting, pre-submission and post-submission meeting. These are introduced like USFDA and EMA. In the rules, it is clearly mentioned about the time-bound approval of clinical trial, and we are seeing good results of that lately. More reporting of clinical trial quarterly and half-yearly reporting has been because there were some delays in the trial or enrollment, etc. So this check has been added. And there was some ambiguity of phase 4 and post-marketing studies. So there was clarity, and now for all the marketing authorization, phase 4 studies is granted and not the PMS. And there's also a recent notification for the fast track approval of Form 29, and that's quite. So there are now these are the things that has happened good so far. And I'm now, the 2 slides are basically talking about what we can do further. So removal of unnecessary permissions and licenses, this can be thought of like Form 29, we can look into that. Then risk-based relaxation, similarly what DCGA has allowed for the pandemic vaccines, COVID vaccines, so stockpiling should be allowed. Then time-bound approvals for the city and the marketing authorization, that could be a very important thing for the industry. Adopt ICH guidelines and become member of ICH and PICS. That's we have heard good news in March 2020, and we are looking forward for this key movement, because this will help the Indian industry for minimizing the international audit if India has audited with respect to the PICS. Leader in regulatory policy and innovation. So Indian CDSO should now take a leadership role, because India is already among the top 5 now, among the top countries in pharma industry to support the US and Europe with respect to the drug supplies. And we have to now get into regulatory policy shaping and innovation in a big way as a leader in that area. And the example that Dr. Sundar suggested, interchangeability, is a very apt suggestion for that. Policies, we should also focus on policies for promoting NCEs and NBE development, and DBT is playing a big role there by providing grants to not only to the companies but also to the institutions and universities for research, and we need to look for future ways how can we develop more NBEs from India. With respect to the new policies required, like for example, NOC for Form 29 and Form 29 for R&D. This is not required anywhere in the world. So we need to look into a kind of a self-declaration kind of a way, where we don't have to really apply and then wait for the approval and all those things. So that is one of the suggestions that I would say. Then animal study approval for rDNA is not required anywhere in the world. Even study approval for pharma drugs is not required in India. So we can provide guideline based on the product class, like for example maps what is expectation of RCGM and DCGI for cytokines, for hormones, etc., and get away from this requirement, because it's a new thing or additional thing that a biologics development has to take care of. Stockpiling before the marketing authorization and manufacturing license. Again, this is for commercial stockpiling I'm talking about, not a clinical trial, and this should be allowed. There is a similar guideline in USFDA for import preparation and importing the product before the marketing authorization. This is the request for biologics, because biologics manufacturing takes a lot of time. Even the testing sometimes takes time. So this is the way we can then be ready for the first 0-day launch, or you can say day 1 launch that we use in the US. There is a we should have e-packaging insert, which we read by our mobile QR codes instead of a hard copy. Singapore has already published a guideline on that, on e-labeling. And this is what I would suggest as regulatory innovations that we need to get into. US and Europe doesn't have a guideline on e-labeling, but Singapore has taken a lead there. So we need to really look into all of this items where we can now take a lead. Then there's a single window process there's a long demand from the industry because there are several agencies involved right now, and introduction of interchangeable clause to the similar biologics guidelines. So these are the few things which new policies should be considered by the agencies. With respect to some of the success stories in India, world leader in vaccines, Serum, Bharat Biotech, they have already make all of us proud by providing the COVID vaccine in a very short time. Significant player in biosimilars. Biosimilars launched in India and emerging market. Few companies also entered US and Europe. So apart from pharma, we have already proven our mettle in vaccine, and now with several companies getting US, Europe approval, we are also a significant player in biosimilars. There are a lot of new entrants in novel biologics. So Biocon, Bharat, Serum and Vaccines, and Cadila Healthcare, they are also developing novel biologics and entering into the market. And there are new entrants in new therapies like cell therapy and gene therapy, where people are very much working right now, and we will shortly see some products out of these new therapies. So like pharma, biologicals are all set to make India proud. I would like to go through this biological impact story of Covishield and Covaxin and all the colleagues who are there from Serum and Bharat Biotech. We appreciate your efforts and your hard work for this. With respect to industry, so these are the silent features, what industry has done better and how regulators also have done better. So industry had done a lot of collaborations and tie-ups for development, manufacturing, etc. There was good research for the indigenously developed product. Industry used multiple approaches like vaccines. There are several approaches of developing vaccines. Even the equine was used for developing vaccine. Parallel development happened everywhere. Quick resolution of the issues. Initial engagement with regulators. Many companies established their own new facilities. Some of them outsourced production. They quickly understood, and they took the risk to do stockpiling, even though the clinical trials were on. So that is a big thing that industry has done. Rapid enrollment of patients in the trial. So the clinical trial departments were very, very active. Though we were in the COVID pandemic, they were doing that work. Alternate vendor development, because a lot of items were banned to be imported to India, and that's where industry worked very hard on that. If you look at from the regulators or government silent features, they were very active right from our Prime Minister. COVID task force was established. They set a quick guidelines on what is required. They did quick review. As Gurjit rightly mentioned, there were regulators, very few regulators who were in the office because of the COVID pandemic, but they're working very hard, long hours, even on Saturday, Sundays, to make sure that the review happens. They took risk-based relaxation. So like for many drugs, they relaxed the shelf life requirement, which was earlier 65% to low than 65%. And that has helped for stockpiling of some of the goods. Stockpiling permission was given by the regulators. For COVID projects, SEC meeting was on a weekly basis, so which was quite a good, and there were a lot of to and fro's in the SEC meeting. For the first time, everybody heard the emergency use authorization, which was a very good thing. based on the interim phase 3 data. Regulators and government work with industry. We saw our Prime Minister going to each vaccine manufacturing facilities and making sure that they are confident and they are motivated for the future work. Relaxation in export permissions, so that was also given for some of them. So based on all of this, whole vaccine community, we were able to develop vaccine NDs in record time. India has emerged as vaccine manufacturing hub. So not only Serum and Bharat Biotech, but there were other companies who have engaged into the vaccine manufacturing for some of the Russian companies. And we, at the end, delivered safe and efficacious COVID vaccine for the world. So what we look at the Indian biologics scenario, if we see that the dependency on the imported drug is going down, the local manufacturing is going up since 1995. This is where I started my career, so I'm looking from that angle. And lately, we have also seen the emergence of novel biologics manufactured in India, developed and manufactured in India, coming up very strongly. So now let's go to the biosimilar battles. So there are many battles that biosimilars have to face. And there's a scientific battle that no, biosimilar can't be developed. So in India and US, Europe, all these battles are won. Then there's a parliament battle, though there's no act or there's no rules. So those kind of things that has also for Europe, and the European agency has given the directive, and US there was an act. Then there's a regulatory battle that, okay, there's an act, but there's no guideline. We don't know what to do. So that also has been now won, and there's a regulatory guideline everywhere. Most of the good countries have that. Then there's a legal patent dance, as you all know, that's everywhere. And but the three battles that still are partially won in US and Europe are physician, which are not, because they are not used it for years or decades, unlike India. And that's why there's still physicians ask for more data, etc. Pharmacist and patient. And there's some work to do in that aspect. So apart from this battle, we also have, biosimilar also have battles to worry about is innovator companies, because they lower their price, they can influence their stakeholders, doctors, etc. And then there are biosimilar companies, like not only there are like 4 to 5 trastuzumab players in US right now. So they will also have their share. And that's why there is a battle to be won from the competition there. Then there is, you have trastuzumab, but then there's second generation products like trastuzumab M10C, which is also a better product than trastuzumab. So we have to worry about that, improved versions, etc. And then there is a new chemical molecule which is targeted for the same indication. So that also is a battle to look into. So Indian companies who have received biosimilar approvals in EU and US or Japan so far are Intas, Biocon, Lupin, and USV. So Gujit, I have a biologics presentation slide, but I think I stopped here because we are close to the...
I think we are already crossing time a bit, and let's open it for question and answers. I would like Dr. Tamal Raha, a panelist who is again is very well renowned in, and both Sameer was at Zydus Cadila. He was at that time heading Cipla Biotech when we did the last biosimilar guidelines. Sameer now heads Bharat Serum and vaccines, and he has had several approvals during this time, the regulatory as well as project management. And Tamal, we have a couple of questions. Tamal has founded IBPS, and he's also a partner with us, strategic business partner. Tamal, are you there?
Yeah,
I'll read out.
I'm here.
So there is one question from Girish Vagela. Impact assessment of biosimilar with respect to PK and PD in relation to heterogeneity of reference product. You could take it on, and there are several other questions. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So this particular thing, it's a good question though, but we also need to understand what are the parameters for any biologics or biologics product. We need to understand what are the factors which can control the PK/PD, right? Um, for example, the PK is, which is the in vivo half-life of the molecule, is controlled by the ability of the molecule to bind with its receptor, number one. For monoclonal antibodies, there is another factor that we consider for PK, which is ability to bind the monoclonal antibody with the neonatal receptor, right? So receptor binding as well as neonatal receptor binding. These are two things which controls PK. There are a few other things which controls PK. For example, the high mannose content. If the molecule is glycosylated, what is the high mannose content? Now, when you develop a biosimilar product, basically the first expectation is you will be analyzing innovator product, understand their variability, and you design your product where all these critical quality attribute falls under falls within the variability within the natural variation of the innovator molecule. Now, as long as what we see in PK is basically the uh, average effect that the mixture of this molecule does in the body, right? So as long as you are matching the product quality in terms of critical quality parameters, you don't expect any difference. So we haven't seen any biosimilar product which matches the key quality attribute fails in PK/PD so far. So there is not a single example as on today, and Samir has taken us also the historical aspects on biosimilars, and Sundar has also talked about it. So we need to understand that if we do justice on the comparability aspect, the physicochemical comparability, in vitro functional comparability, and make sure that uh, in the critical quality attributes, the biosimilar product matches the natural variation of the innovator, you don't fail in PK/PD. So the risk is you minimize the risks. So that's why it's a stepwise development program. So you don't really jump into PK/PD until and unless you do this comparability exercise upfront.
Thank you. There's another question of that for preclinical, do we need a GLP approved lab?
So preclinical, from the scientific perspective, you don't need, so which kind of preclinical? If I do a single dose efficacy study or a small efficacy study in animal, I don't need a GLP study. If I do a single dose study, I don't need a GLP study. Ideally, why do we need a GLP? When do we need a GLP study? When you do a repeat dose toxicity studies, that's where you need a GLP study. So what is GLP? GLP is, one part is the compliance, another part is the control environment that you operate within that control environment. When you do a long-term repeat dose toxicity study, expectation, and it's the regulators expect that you will do a GLP study. For other smaller in vivo efficacy study and all, I think good scientific practice should be fine. Nobody expects to have a GLP lab for that. If you do it, nothing like it, but it's not mandatory.
Thank you very much. I'll now invite Mr. Uday Bhaskar, who's the Honorary Director General of IDECOC, basically the Academy, to share with us his vision of exports of biopharma and pharma, basically, and add to the Atmanirbharta, the capacity. We have emerged as the vaccinator of the world, not only as Samir and others mentioned for our own developed vaccines, both in the government and private sector, but also in terms of the imported Russian. Now, J&J vaccine is actually, including the drug substance, is being developed at biologically. So they would have to depend on that for a major part of their commitment when it, for Indian population as well as for COVAX. So India is really the vaccinator. And Lakshmi, please request Uday Bhaskarji to address us.
Lakshmi.
Yeah, fine, sir.
Yeah.
I didn't see you, so
No. Ma'am, thank you very much. We already had very eminent speakers like you and Sundar and Tanmay. My regulatory friends, Dr. Prasad and Rajban, is going to offer closing remarks. Yes, I would like to take a couple of minutes only on export perspective, and I'll confine myself to the biosimilars and biologicals. So you know that even during pandemic also the drug control administration in the states as well as at the center, they worked a lot, and they have never taken any leaves or lockdown. Like that, industry also played a very pivotal role in providing medicines not only to India as well as to the world. So we financially at 21, we exported 24.4 billion US dollars worth of drugs with 18% growth rate. This was happened only after 8 years. So this it's very encouraging. But if you see the kind of a progress what we are making in the area of biologics and biosimilars. So out of 24.4 billion, our exports of biosimilars are only 170 million. 170 million is a fraction of 24.4 billion. I appreciate the kind of a proactive approach of Kiran ma'am and Biocon particularly. They are doing fantastic job, and she is also very vocal in representing the industry on the issues of even Pharmexil also. We have requested many a time the government. You need to give special encouragement to the products like complex generics or biosimilars and vaccine industry, helping hand and the more support. So that is going to help. Our competitors like China and others like Korea and all these countries are working very well, and they are well advanced as far as biosimilars are concerned. So what I feel, definitely the able and very prominent, I'm very much happy. From the past 1 year, there are people who are attending these webinars in 200 or 100 or 80. But I have seen only 2 people left this session even after 1.5 hours. That indicates that people are more interested to know about the area where the regulators as well as the industry is thinking that it's a rocket science. So particularly the role what Able and Biocon and biosimilar industry is playing is fantastic. So at the interest of the time, we'd like to continue to engage All India Drugs Control Officers Confederation, continue to work with people like you and people like particularly you convey our best wishes and support to Kiran Majumdar Shaman for doing fantastic job, particularly in the area of biosimilars. So in the coming days, if you are not able to focus on these areas, so it's going to be a tough time for the Indian export community. The vaccine front, we proved the world that earlier we used to supply only the generic medicines. But during COVID, Indian companies like Biosafety, Serum Institute of India, and our friend have mentioned about the Johnson & Johnson with Biologically and Dr. Reddy's, Withdrawal, Panacea, Shilpa, and all these companies are working very closely with Russian Gamaleya and the Sputnik vaccine. It has, India got a very strong recognition. At the same time, we send a very strong message to the world that we are not only providing the generic medicines at affordable price to the world. We are also manufacturing indigenously developed vaccines. Take, for example, Zydus Cadila is coming up with the DNA vaccine, and Bharat Biotech is working with the nasal vaccine. These are, now it sounds very great to the Indian community, particularly the Indian pharmaceutical industry. I think with this, I'll conclude, ma'am. And once again, I love to hear more from the eminent people like, all the doctors first time, other than me and Lakshmi Rajbanu. Others are very, all are doctors, and they are doing very fantastic job in their own areas. Thank you so much, madam. Thank you very much.
Ma'am, you're on mute, ma'am.
Lakshmi, can you request
Yes.
Dr. Raja to now, as Secretary General of the association, to give us the closing remarks?
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you being with us for the entire this program and all, being the starting with all these things and all. I think I request you, ma'am, to kindly sum up the entire things which have been said by the eminent panelists and all. And then I think on behalf of All India Drugs Control Officers Confederation, yes, we will be acknowledging your presence over here, ma'am, if you can, please.
Sure. Listen, the only person I can't do justice to, quite honestly, is Dr. Prasad. He gives such a fundamental, real-time, and he is like the guru for the youngsters, regulators, and for us also in terms of consultation. So essentially, the COVID pandemic has shown us the accelerated pathway of EUA. And how can we adopt and learn from that? It's been largely biologics which have increased the access. He also brought in that they are continuously reviewing those EUAs. The US has not just now recognized the the Pfizer vaccine into a full review, into a full market authorization. And he went through the entire gamut of biologics, as well as on both the novels and biosimilars as well. Then we've had the presentations from Sundar, talking about Sundar from Biocon, in how they have achieved global recognition. And there was the interchange, and we talked about that with the need for basically revising the guidelines. We did them in 2016. They were first done in 2012 and under Dr. Bhan, and then later on, 2016, they were done with Dr. Somani and Professor Vijay Raghavan on the other side, and then it was Dr. Jain Singh, but Dr. Somani actually did the whole manuscript, basically. So we now feel the need that whilst we were ahead of our times, that was the first time the patient numbers were sort of put down, etc. And it was a very collaborative process. And we are talking about that perhaps now it's time. Both DBT Secretary and Dr. Somani have verbally given us a go-ahead that as industry, you all should combine together. I did mention PharmExcel to them as well, because we have to become a larger share. The fact of the matter is that MABs are produced in facilities which are very similar to vaccines. And therefore, if you see, some of the MAB players have been able to build those. Even at Syngene, they're now when you have a MAB facility, it's easier for you to move up the ladder. And similarly, on viral vectors, antibodies, and all the next generation biotherapeutics which are coming up. Samir then presented a legendary slides on how we have had the regulations moving, and then suggested the very important policies, which were also suggested by the other panelists, on product-specific guidelines to be now taken up. Interchangeability was also discussed as a shorter pathway. And the challenge that we have, one of the challenges that we have, that whilst RCGM is really meeting twice? Is there a way that we can do more and more in parallel? What takes 3 months should actually get reduced to even further for the preclinical dossier to be done simultaneously, which DCGI accepts. So in any case, we are finding that response. Last of all, if I have missed out, the policies, the test license doesn't exist internationally. Form 29, therefore, on biologicals, it should be all across the industry. It doesn't matter whether it's generics or biologics. On biologics, you may keep some of the sections where some of the regulators say that if it's important to control the quality, it is not exactly like the generic. So either the manufacturer should be already an approved facility, rather than somebody small and sundry just doing it out of. So if some of those substitutions can be looked at, then the innovative that Singapore has done on e-labeling. During this pandemic time, you approved all the e-commerce was the largest help on access. And the definition of access, as has been done in the NCLT rules, we talked about also the countries that need to be defined so that regulators are clear that on a case-to-case review can be done. On an A side, and this is why I'm saying from my own side, I had a discussion with Dr. Vaike Gupta, and we were talking, is there any drug of globally approved in the ICH countries and a global brand which has not worked on Indian population? So far, we don't have any proof of that. So should we really hold up access of global products, or so that we get the reciprocity, because we are a major export country, like Udayji talked about, and the ratio has to grow. So we have to treat MABs like an infant, which has yet to develop into a full childhood, so that portion of export of MABs has to increase, and the quality standards, and therefore we do need to look at that. Thank you, Raja. That is about all, and we would love to have more sessions with you. You are building the young regulators and skilling them, and thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much for being with us on a very important topic, which I think first let me congratulate and also thank the Honorary Director General Ravi Uday Bhaskar Garu of AIDCOC and Prasanna, the coordinator, for selecting this topic, and also I think taking you on this as a moderator for this entire session, and a constellation of panelists who are expert panelists on this topic. And to start with, let me thank you on behalf of AIDCOC as the General Secretary General, Dr. PBN Prasad, who is the Joint Drugs Controller, CDSCO, for a very, very apt opening remarks on this topic and his views on this one. I think let me tell ma'am and all the other distinguished speakers and all the members who are listening to us, the acknowledgement by the Serum Institute CMD saying that the DCG was available after 5 p.m. So that means itself means that we are on accelerator regulatory pathway. That means we are available 24/7. So is if DCJ is available, so is the drugs controllers across the state, across the country also are available for the industry to develop whatever they are trying to do for the human mankind. So with that one, I think PBN Prasad has given the very important aspect of the regulation, the accelerated emergency process and all those things, emergency use of the drugs, the first time in this country, and how they have been working on those things and all, and how they are really gel with the industry to bring all these things into for the use of in the pandemic situation. So I think there is a important topic which has been taken by Dr. Sundar, like he's pitching for the strength of the country for in this 21st century, and a very important topic which has tried to change interchangeability, the one which has covered up, and of course a very lucid presentation by Dr. Samir Sangeet Rao is his guidelines. He has really took us through the historical aspects of the biologicals and biosimilars, and a series of developments, and also the series of guidelines which have come up from ages and all those things and all, and the way forward with respect to which you have already covered, that I think already the PMO and all the DCJ and DGHS, all they are working on how to reduce the regulatory compliance. I think this has been already worked with the industry, industry, and also trying to talk to all the regulators in the states as well as central, how to reduce the regulatory compliance and to bring more changes into this one, so that the other hurdles are reduced while taking permissions, market authorizations, and the licenses. And I think that way, I think Dr. Samir has covered a major chunk of this aspect of this one. And of course, Dr. Tamal Raha has cleared certain doubts of one of those members who have asked about. And as is rightly said by Dr. Uday Bhaskar as a DG Farm Excel, the way the country with respect to biologicals and biosimilars, they have really come up a long way, and they have contributed for the exports from this country. And I think last but not the least, to Dr. Guljit ma'am, to you, that bringing up all these things, summing up all these things in a very lucid way, and see that all the questions and answers of all the members who are participating here have been taken up, and really they have been enriched with this experience. And on behalf of AIDCOC, since 1995, we have been working very closely with the industry as well as all the regulators across the country, both in the state as well as central, to see that the regulators they are enriching their experiences way, and also they are trying to facilitate the industry and facilitate, of course, though as the regulator they have a role to play, but at the same time with the experience of the industry as well as their own, and they are trying to guide, they are trying to facilitate the industry, and thereby forging and building as the tagline of the Farm Excel, that the pharmacy of the world. I think with these words, I really thank all the members of the AIDCOC, the panelists. I think we missed from Rao from DBT, but I think some other time we'll catch up with him. I think we'll be continuing this association with the industry captains and all, and we'll be working very closely to see that our regulators as well as industry gain by this one. Thank you so much. And Lakshmi, thanks for giving this opportunity.
Thank you everyone, and special thanks to Dr. Prasad sir and Dr. Guljit for your valuable time, and a big thanks to Guljit ma'am for planning the entire session. And in fact, you have made my job very simple, and you have planned the entire session and look forward the discussions in a very elaborative manner. And we really look forward to work with your team in a longer way, either on the AdCoc platform and on the other side of Farm Excel platform. And we really wish to have a longer association with your organization. On that note, I formally call off the meeting, and we are already 10 minutes past to the scheduled time. Thanks again, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Lakshmi, and everybody.
Thank you,
Namaskar, and salute to all the regulators for keeping our country safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.